A couple of weeks ago, in the middle of the Cumbrian monsoon season, that's when it never stopped raining day after day after day, and we all got very downhearted, a piece of film arrived from a friend. It was 15 minutes of pure joy in a wet and weary world. My friend had taken his camera into Tullie House Gallery in Carlisle one afternoon in 2017 during the Percy Kelly Retrospective, and had asked permission to take his camera for a walk around the gallery, picking up a few comments from people on the way. It was quite a busy afternoon he chose. He told me about it and said he would edit it and let me have it, but he hadn't had time to do that until this lockdown. So I thought you'd like to see the video. Maybe you missed the exhibition. Maybe you're one of the people who are new to Percy Kelly. Or maybe it'll be a reminder to those of you who remember the retrospective. A bit of a warning though, some of you are in the film. So before I show you the short film, you'll have to be patient for a little while. I think that, like me, you've probably been missing gallery visits. I've missed them like crazy, all the exhibitions I could have gone to. So before I show you the film, I'll tell you how the retrospective came together. From the minute I got the whole of Percy Kelly's exhibition, a thought did rush through my head that one day there would be a retrospective of his work, because it was so varied, it was so wonderful, and there was so much of it. I also decided in my head that I would like it at Tullie House, mainly because they have the best gallery space in Cumbria. But also, it was because Percy Kelly had connections with it. Not with the new gallery that was actually built in and opened in 1991 by the Queen. So it was long after Percy's time in Cumbria. But he would have remembered it like this. This is the staircase in the old Tullie House. And at that time, when Percy was starting at Carlisle College of Art to study printmaking, he would have gone up that staircase many, many times because the painting studio was on the second floor. So it would be familiar to him. As would the lovely gardens at Old Tullie House. You can still go in there, not just the gardens, but actually in Old Tullie House and up the stairs and so on. They've often got some nice things showing in there from their permanent collection. He would also have gone through the arch into Castle Street and across to the printing department, which was situated on the site of what are now the council offices and just at the edge of Hardwick Circle. But another reason, as the time drew nearer and it became more urgent to put on a retrospective of Percy's work, it was a more practical reason that Carlisle is on the main line out of Euston to Glasgow and Edinburgh. And that was pretty important because I knew by then that people would be coming a long way to see this exhibition, and the gallery is just a short walk from the railway station. But even more importantly was that time was moving on, and every year that passed would make it more difficult to track down paintings, because it was coming up towards 25 years since his death, and when I got all the work. And so I persuaded Tullie House to let me curate a retrospective. I was turned down twice, but I won in the end. So I made a list of what I would like in an ideal world to showcase Percy Kelly's outstanding talent and all the aspects of his work. I wanted a massive impact the moment the public came through the door. I wanted them to be faced with something breathtaking. But I was restricted, really. Money was tight at that time, well, it still is for galleries and museums and so on. I'd waived my curatorial fee, but it was expensive to collect work from scattered individuals, and so I was given a distance limit. I was mainly confined to Cumbria. But luckily, I had friends and family who could get theirs to me directly, or directly to Tullie House. So I decided on key pieces, but as I feared, some couldn't be traced, as people had moved on, moved house, moved out of the country, some of them, or maybe they'd died. This one is an iconic piece which I really particularly wanted. It's White House in Lawton, which is just down the valley towards Loweswater and Crummockwater. And it was an iconic piece. It was used on posters and banners, and it belonged, I'd sold it to a Newcastle solicitor. He'd moved to Cumbria and I had an address there, but I just couldn't trace him. I couldn't get hold of him. But just as I was despairing, I bumped into his partner in House of Fraser in Carlisle. She was living a stone's throw from Tullie House. Michael had died, but she was more than willing to let us borrow it for the retrospective. I wasn't as lucky with all of them. This one is Birthday Flowers, and it was the one that got away. It was the first time that anybody had queued overnight for a painting. It wasn't the last, mind. And a couple from Preston had fallen in love with it and had bribed their daughter to camp out overnight. And I couldn't trace it. After the retrospective, it came up in auction. And guess what? I bought it. I couldn't resist it. And I look at it every day and really enjoy it. So, once I had a comprehensive wish list, I printed off an image of each one of what I thought would be suitable for the retrospective. I had a lot more than I could possibly hang. That was why it was so marvellous to have so much to choose from. And I went along on what I thought would be a quiet afternoon in 2016 to have a think, have a look at the gallery again, and decide where things were going to go and how it would pan out. Well, it was the school holidays, and there was an exhibition of dragons at the time, and there were children running about everywhere, riding on dragons, drawing dragons, but they were so excited that they ignored me with my bits of paper, and I managed to wander around putting them where I thought they could possibly go without being disturbed at all. And none of those children moved any of my little postage stamp sized bits of paper. This is a photograph of, not of the dragons and not of the retrospective, but of shoes. That was quite a small exhibition, but I've put this photograph in because it does illustrate how that gallery works. It's wonderfully versatile because the shoe exhibition was quite small. And so you could actually move the walls in. You can move the walls on a grid system in the ceiling. And it gives you the absolutely so much versatility. You can do what you want with it. And because this was a small exhibition, you could bring the walls in, the walls down, and it was a lovely intimate gallery space. The trouble was that I could do exactly what I wanted with this vast space. But what did I want? I'd almost got too much freedom. Many exhibitions of an artist like Percy Kelly in point, they're hung to a sort of a timeline. You start with the early works and you work your way through to the time of his death or his retirement or whatever. But how often had I started at this beginning, sometimes like a biography? They start with all the fine details of somebody's ancestry and their childhood, and you plough through that to get to the really exciting stuff. So I decided I didn't want that. I wanted an immediate impact the moment you entered the gallery. And I chose two stunning paintings that would set the mood and epitomise Percy's work. This was the first one I chose, which would face you as soon as you went through the door. When I sold it, it was one of the first ones I sold in 1994. Luckily, I sold it to my dentist who lives in Cockermouth, so I didn't have any problem getting the loan of it for this. But I had to label and title all those paintings, that came up from Norfolk. And Percy had titled so few, because why would he? If he wasn't going to sell any, why would they need a title? So I had to do that, and I got this one terribly wrong. I titled it as Near Loweswater. But in fact, many years later, I realised, I'll tell you the time when we get to that painting, I realised the profile of the mountains and so on. And that fell straight ahead is Dale Head, and running to the right of it is Hinesgarth. And it's actually, I've had a cup of tea at that farm on the way down at the bottom of Hinesgarth, and it is definitely Newlands Valley. And when I told my dentist this, she was very amused and didn't mind at all. I think when you get to Percy Kelly's work, it doesn't matter where it is. That is immaterial, really. It's just an extra little bonus on the side. The other one I chose was this iconic view of Maryport Harbour. It's a very, very long one. It's about 6 feet long and 2.5 feet high. And it's the view that so many artists have done who have visited Maryport. It's from the settlement, high on the hill above, and looking along into the harbour. Sheila Fell did it, L.S. Lowry did it, and lots of other artists have had a go at it in their time. It's quite a difficult view to actually paint. It's a case of getting the perspective right and so on. But I then needed to break up the space into separate themes. I was going to do it separate areas with separate subjects in small, quite intimate spaces. And I wanted to create an air of anticipation so that it kind of drew people through. I wanted it to lure them through to the more spectacular artworks that I was going to hang at the end. This is the gallery as it was hung at that time, just one of the views. And if you look behind the display case there, you've got the large Parton looking north. I stuck that right in the middle so that people would be lured through to the next section. And then I did the same with the next one. Oh, there's Parton looking north. That's a huge one as well. And it was one of people's favourites when they were asked. And Crosby Villas is just spectacular. And so I put that one on the next corner round, so that would lure them through to the end wall, which would be revealed with 5 wonderful pieces making a grand finale. The centre of those 5 would be this one of Newlands Valley. Now it's that one, looking at that carefully, that made me realise that I'd got the title wrong for my dentist's work. That's Dale Head to the left, and there's Hinesgarth on the way down. And this is the road from the Purple House down into into Newlands Church and so on, which is just showing in white down at the bottom of the valley. So that was in the centre, and that's about 8 foot long and more than 3 foot wide, tall, really. And so I was going to flank it on either side by 2 spectacular paintings. This is one of them, Green Landscape, which is it just lights up that one. He's just so clever with his washes. It's only gouache, it's not oil or anything like that. But his washes were wonderful, and that just lights up wherever it's hung. Next to it was White Cottage. No idea where White Cottage is, doesn't matter. It could be in Wales, it could be in the Yorkshire Dales, it could be in Cumbria, could be in South Cumbria. But that road just leads your eye round to it. And it's just a wonderful piece of work. The other side, flanking Newlands, was this one of the setting sun. Percy loved to put a sun in a painting. If he was in the right mood, it was. And a sun would often just light up the whole thing and give a focus, as this one does. It's quite amusing, really, that sometimes he would have the sun in the wrong place geographically, in that I just sold one of a boat in Whitehaven Harbour. And we in the end, we all laughed and called it the wrong sun, because the setting sun or midday sun, not quite sure which, is actually to the north, and so, or to the east. And so it can't possibly be a setting sun, and it wasn't a rising sun. But it didn't matter. This is the whole thing, that it didn't really matter where or what, as long as the painting was balanced. And this painting is wonderfully balanced, especially with the telephone pole that you hardly notice to the left, but it's quite essential as the vertical in the picture. And finally, this one is Golden Landscape. And again, it just lights up a room. It was bought early on by a friend in Ennerdale who lives up there on the Ennerdale Fells. And he was absolutely convinced that it's Ennerdale. And it may be, but it could be anywhere, couldn't it? But once I placed those 9 pieces in my head and on the floor, it had to be in my head with all these dragons around, it was time to begin moving walls. Well, virtually moving walls. So I could now work round the key themes, the structural pieces that I'd got. So I made an area for charcoals. This is one of my favourite charcoals. He did so many, there were far too many to choose from. And this marked in 1958 a wonderful turnaround for Percy, because he suddenly, we don't know why, but he was very depressed at the time, he suddenly started working on huge pieces of paper and with charcoal. And the little pernickety watercolours disappeared out the window, and in came these big, bold pieces. And this one's called Windy Day. And by golly, you don't need a title to know that, do you? Those trees are kind of reaching for the sky in distress. So next, I decided that some of his coastal scenes were just wonderful. He very rarely faced the sea. He was far more interested, he said, in looking inland from the sea, inwards, to see what people were doing and where they were living and so on. And so I decided we'd have a bigger space that would take you on a walk from St. Bees, that's St. Bees there with the priory and the school, etc., along the coast in a northerly direction. Here's the Whitehaven looking down from the fan house into the harbour. And in a way, it's a harbinger of what you're going to see next, because you can see the next headland that leads round to Parton. And then the Lauker sort of tip heap, that's a pit heap there with the little chimney on top. And then to the next headland, which takes you round to Workington and Maryport. And we end in Allenby, much further along the coast to the north, where Audrey and Percy lived for more than 10 years. And this is a farmhouse just north of Allenby. It took me a very long time to find it and to be able to give this painting its proper name. I just called it White House and Bridge or something like that. But we now know that it's Old Kiln Farm. And that was an appropriate one. That's as far as the West Cumbrian coastal walk took you at that time. The next one I went for was oil paintings. There were very few of those, and it took a lot of trouble to get enough together to fill quite a small space, but it was well worth doing. He never did more than 25. I think he did about between 25 and 30 oils, mainly because Audrey, his wife, couldn't stand the smell of linseed and turps and stuff like that. And so she brought that to a halt because she didn't like it. It's funny, isn't it, the different reasons you get for different things happening. And the next one was Cornwall, because Percy, during the 50s and early 60s, went down to Cornwall to Newlyn, to a painting school there. He taught at a painting school every summer in Newlyn. He did an awful lot of his own work there, I've noticed. And I've never met anybody who was actually at that painting school. But this is Zena Church, which is on the northern coast of Cornwall. And he strayed a lot all along that coastline, painting some wonderful, wonderful paintings. So we had a whole section for Cornwall. And in his second year at Carlisle College of Art, he won a travel scholarship. And he decided to go to Brittany. Now, during the war, where he and his twin brother volunteered in 1939, he was posted out to Normandy for a while and then to further inland towards Germany, ending up actually in Germany after the war had been won. And I think he'd picked up quite a bit of French as well there. So he went to somewhere where he could start with the familiar, driving. He took the old car out there. I hope it didn't break down too many times. And he could drive through Normandy and get to Brittany. He saw many, many galleries there who wanted his work. Tell me the old story, eh? I don't know whether he sold any over there to help him pay for the trip. It was a grant that he was given, or a prize. But there aren't a lot of Brittany ones, so maybe he sold them on the spot. Maybe he hadn't got so retentive at that time. And what did we do next? Well, he ran away with Chris. And first of all, they lived for a while near Kendal at Levens in a cottage that the Baggots let him rent. And so for the first time, Percy began to explore the Yorkshire Dales. And this one is simply called Wensleydale. I found that written on the back, or I wouldn't have known. Yellow House, Wensleydale. I just love the way he's put that road to the farmhouse just straight up, not in the middle, just off centre, but straight up there. And then to the right, you've got that little copse of trees, which are just perfect at pulling the eye round to the kind of barn place over on the left. That is a perfect composition, you know. Where next? Now Percy painted flowers all his life, from dried teasels, things in vases. The sunflowers on the left were fairly typical in that he did lots and lots of sunflowers in different guises. That's quite a big one and is very kind of cheery-uppy, but sunflowers always are. And on the right of it, I've deliberately put them together, is one of his really, really delicate watercolours of harebells. That is just so beautiful and so different. So many people comment on the fact that Percy's work changed so much during his life. But then, a good artist, that's what happens. They develop. If they don't ever develop and they go through life painting the same view, or in the same way, or the same butterfly, or whatever, it really doesn't develop the work along. And the great difference with Percy is the way that he experimented right the way through his life. So what did I go for next? And he did like insects and beetles and things like that too. I put that one in with the flowers. And his stepson, Andrew, who was in Wales, that was done when Percy was in Wales. I do that because I got letters in which he's said that Andrew had cycled to a place that had a public library. He was quite impressed that Andrew had cycled there knowing that he was painting insects and was grumbling that he couldn't find enough around the garden and so on. And Andy borrowed a book of insects and so brought it back on the bike for Percy. But in fact, that's not a straight copy of a photo in a book, is it? It's a Percy Kelly version of a stag beetle. He just couldn't just copy something just like that. It has been said that he's copied from photograph, he's copied from this, that and the other. But no, he always made it his own. He might have based it on a photograph if he couldn't get to the place. but it was always his own work, absolutely through and through, and that illustrates it. So what's next? One of my favourites, and one of the favourites of somebody in the film. We've got this wonderful red sun again. This is a tiny painting. It's very small. I called it Blue Door, but it's dominated by the sun. I think it is one of a cottage in Pembrokeshire, but I couldn't be certain of that, and it doesn't matter, does it? It's got a typical Kelly wall with kind of big stones shown in it, and this fabulous sun. So I did a whole area of what I called were little gems, all these tiny things that people absolutely loved. They spent a lot of time in there. In fact, I was told by some of the staff at Tullie House that people were spending so much longer in this exhibition than they normally did. And actually a really significant amount of time longer, because they worked their way through these things slowly and enjoyed every moment, I gather. And here we get to Pembrokeshire, which Percy spent 10, 12 years there. It was an unhappy time for him. He was very happy to begin with because he was with Chris, but they were so strapped for cash. They were renovating a wreck of 2 houses and no roof and facilities or anything. How Percy got any painting done, I don't know. This is Fishguard, and this is another of his huge panoramic views. That again is about 8 foot by about 3 foot. And it's wonderful. I have stood on that hillside and looked down into the harbour. There's a good gallery there, by the way. But the man in the gallery had shown some of Chris's work, Percy's wife, but he didn't know Percy was even a painter. Percy kept that very quiet, you know. And here we've got some of his marvellous calligraphy. This is one that I particularly like because he stained the paper with potassium, which is a purple liquid, but when you've dipped paper in it, it turns brown. And he'd used the brown ink, dark brown ink, to make the quotation, which is it's very much a Kelly quotation. I don't know whether it was his or whether he picked it up from somewhere, but it's a beautiful piece of work. And so we now get to the intimate corner, to the right of the grand finale. Luckily, in that corner, there was a plug that could take a television screen. So that's where I put the television, couldn't put it anywhere else. And around it I put more intimate pieces, one of his letters, this lovely painting of a studio, a room in the house in Pembrokeshire, which I think it was a bungalow, I'm not sure what it was, but it took a lot of his time at the time. And the television we put on Percy talking about his work. And this is the church at Caston, near his pear tree cottage in Norfolk, where he had his last 10 years on his own, because after 3 years, Chris left him in despair. It wasn't the cross-dressing that worried her. She was a very broad-minded woman, very sympathetic. It was the poverty. She just could take no more of this way of life, of trying to scrounge food and so on and keep them alive with no money coming in. And this was the church that Percy painted in 1981 of Caston Church when Anglia TV came and did a programme about him. And this is, you see him in that film painting this. So there are 2 of Caston Church and I hung them both together. It was interesting to see school parties looking at the film, sitting and watching the film, and their eyes trailing round, looking at the paintings that kept appearing in the film that I deliberately put somewhere nearby. Some I put further afield, so they weren't. They didn't get it on a plate. And here we are in Pear Tree Cottage, or looking at Pear Tree Cottage. And that was where Percy spent his last years, alone, very depressed, and so on. And here we are. I finished the exhibition with the photograph of Percy in his 20s in Loweswater, sitting on a gate, and then as Roberta in Pear Tree Cottage. I think that was taken in 1991 or 92. It was taken on Joan David, his correspondent's last visit, which was 1992. And she took that. He was very relaxed and let her take one of him as Roberta, which he was quite shy about. So, I ended my sojourn in the Dragon department or exhibition, and I'd still got some pieces of paper in my hand. And this worried me really, because I thought, what have I got here? And it was the early works of Percy, which were pretty important, and his printmaking, which was really important because we were in the place where he was actually studying at the time. And so I began to have a look round, and my memory then, I went back to the opening of the exhibition at the doorway where you go in, and I strongly remembered going in there and that there was a space to my left which was totally boarded off. And I knew that there was a big space behind it, and I could probably get small space for the early works and a bigger space for the printmaking, because I needed a lot of room for that. So I came out and inquired of the in-house curator, Melanie. And she said to me, oh, no, that we don't use that now because it's storage. Storage, right. I didn't know what to do. When I got home that evening, I said, you know when we went to see the Crosby Garrett Roman helmet at Tullie House, and we went through the door into the gallery, which way did we turn? Oh, we turned left, said Michael. And he thought for a minute or two, and then he said, yeah, and do you remember when we went to when they did the history of the Cumberland News? You started off in there. Why? Anyway, I went back into Tullie House and asked them if I could have that space. And I got it. I don't know what they did with the storage, but I got it. And so I now had space for the early works. This is just one that I've chosen from them all. This is 1949, so it's pretty early. He'd just got back from the army and the war, and it's Buttermere. But there's a mystery about this one, because both I and the curator, the general curator at Tullie House, or the head curator, should I say, sorry, Melanie, we looked at it, and she said, what are those scribbly lines on there in sort of yellow? And I said, do you know, I've been thinking about that. I said, because they actually look like felt tip pen. But in 1949, there were no felt tip pens. And she said, I was thinking the same thing. But I said, it could be wax crayon. And we looked closer, but it was more like felt tip pen. The rest of it's watercolour and ink. And so I think, or our theory was, that in those long winter nights when he used to sit in Norfolk writing his letters to people and illustrating them and so on, in his total loneliness, I began to wonder whether the reason he'd hung on to everything and wouldn't sell anything and wouldn't let anything go, he was actually riffling through some of his works that were all piled up in bread trays all round his cottage, so much so he couldn't even get up the stairs to his bedroom. And I think he was plucking things out of these bread trays and maybe thinking he'd like to just go over something, strengthen a line, put a bit of colour in, perhaps put a red sun in somewhere. You just don't know. how he would react to all that. But I think, having now thought of it and then looked at other things, I think that's what he did. Well, I then had carte blanche for a larger space, because most of the early works were quite small. It was before he discovered big pieces of paper and charcoal. And so I'd got a big space for the printmaking, which was just as it should be. And I've just picked out these two, because I think they're quite interesting. Lots of people think that printmaking is that you take a photograph of a painting and you take it to a printer and he prints it off, and then you sell them. You make a lot of money. Now, that's not real printmaking, that's reproduction. It's like postcards. A postcard's a reproduction of a view or whatever. But printmaking is when you work, the print is the original. And here, what you've got is an original drawing of a raven in charcoal that was actually a guide to Percy to see how it would fit on the paper, how he wanted it to balance. And then, of course, it's a lithograph. He made the blanket for the lithograph to then print off something that is the raven. But it's different. He's worked it out in charcoal, and then he's made it as a print. So it's an original print. There are some subtle differences to that. Anyway, we've now got as far as the film. It's been a long wait, but I hope it's given you a little bit more insight into it. So here you are.
They're all of places that you think, oh, I recognise that. Oh, I know where that is.
It's fantastic, absolutely unbelievable. I wish I could buy one. I like the one with the red sun. I like the little ones best. I think they're lovely.
But it's so nice to see all his work in one place, more or less all anyway.
A native to Cumbria at all, but I've learned so much about the countryside and his wonderful painting, wonderful sense of perspective. I've never seen anything like it, I don't think. It's a great pleasure.
Such an impressive assembly of different styles and different work.
I'm Melanie Gardner and I'm one of the curators here at Tullie House, and I'd just like to welcome you to the Percy Kelly Line of Beauty Retrospective exhibition, which has proved incredibly popular so far. As many of you know, Percy Kelly is one of Cumbria's most well-known and best-loved 20th century artists. He had an extraordinary talent and a very unique and individual style. And this is the most comprehensive exhibition of his work to date. And by popular demand, because we've had so many visitors, we are able to extend the exhibition right the way through until the 18th of February. So that means you have another 3 weeks to come back and look at it. We've had visitors coming 3, 4, 5 times, so I do encourage you to have a good look this afternoon. The exhibition 2018 marks the centenary of Percy Kelly's death, and it also marks the 25th anniversary of his birth. He was born in Workington to a very poor working class family. The family didn't have any interest or background in art at all, and it was said that Percy could draw before he could talk. In fact, I think Chris Wadsworth recounts a story of him actually drawing on the breakfast table in a very adult manner a teapot when he was just a toddler. So he was really a child prodigy, a one-off really.
It's extraordinary the range of work that he's produced, all to a really high standard as well.
Yes, it's a nice exhibition. We've just been to Malaga and seen Picasso and such like and really enjoyed it, but this is marvellous, the variety that we can see here in Cumbria as well. We especially like it because we live just near where he stayed, at Allenby, and when we go to see the paintings we can see shots of Maryport, Allenby and the Fells, and it's so nice to try and put them together. But I do understand that he did take artistic liberties and just made up various buildings and knocked buildings down and such like to improve the design, so some of them have us flummoxed.
Yeah, somewhere near, not far from where we live, yeah. So working out what side of the Beckett might be painted from, and whether, because I know someone who lives near there, and I was wondering if that might be the house they live in, but I don't think it is.
You're obviously a fan of his work?
You have been for a long time, yes. Yeah. We went to a talk a number of years ago in Beetham that I think Chris Wadsworth gave then. So ever since then I've been really interested in his paintings and fascinated by particularly the illustrated letters, which are amazing, really. I really love those.
How much would you like to have got one of those?
Oh, that would be quite something, wouldn't it, really? Yeah. And we used to live in West Cumberland as well. Our first house was in Cleaton Moor. So it's really quite fascinating to see some of the paintings of places there, which are not pretty at all, but to see the way he looks at them, it makes you look at them again and see them completely differently, which is fascinating, really. It's a fascinating bloke, I think.
Actually, I was just looking at the Trumpet Terrace Cleator over there, because when we lived in the Cleator Moor area, it just captures the old terraces and the wonderful, rather random colour scheme that they have, with people using pink and yellow and white, and it's really good. I also used to live near, just above Parton, and I think he captures the essential loneliness of Parton, but it's quite isolated, even though it's very close to Whitehaven, because it's right down below the main road and right on the seashore where the wind blows very, very hard. It is rather an isolated village, and he captures that very well.
It's kind of an honest interpretation, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's really, it captures something about the atmosphere of the place. Better than a photograph could, and I have tried to photograph it very often. Never with great success.
Percy Kelly was my uncle, and you don't appreciate, when you're young, but now when you see all these paintings, it's just wonderful. Quite proud of him now.
When you say now, was it?
Well, at the time you just accept that your uncle paints, and you don't really think a lot of it, and it isn't till you see all these paintings together. It is really good, yeah.
Is this the first time you've been to the exhibition?
It is, yeah. We live down in Lincolnshire, so it's a bit far, so we're up for the weekend, especially to see it.
Big weekend for you then?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. It's turned out a really big weekend, yeah.
And what's the one thing that you remember about him as a man?
As an uncle?
Yeah.
Well, he was my dad's twin brother, so I think you always probably thought of them, you know. When you thought of my uncle, you think of my dad, because they were twins and totally different, but twins.
We knew only a little bit about him, so this afternoon, an event like this is all about putting the jigsaw pieces together and understanding him as a person and him as an artist as well.
And seeing some of his records of the historic industrial landscapes before they all disappeared was good in a publication we've seen. So it links together nicely.
Very good collection, and lots of different various things. Very good.
I think the personal stuff, again, I feel as though I have a better understanding of Percy Kelly, what he was like, and the people around him. And the exhibition itself is much more extensive than I had thought it was going to be. Really, really good. Very good day.
Loved it, yes, I've absolutely loved it. Always liked Percy Kelly's paintings and tried even to try something like that myself. Very unsuccessful. They look simple, but they're not. But it's lovely this afternoon, the two talks, yes, very personal.
I've absolutely loved it, yeah, it's been great. Met some very interesting people who had met him and told stories about him, so yeah, it's been fantastic.
Been different to other exhibitions?
Well, this one's been here the whole time I've worked here, so I'm going to kind of miss it now that it's going, to be honest. So yeah, I can only go by my experience of this exhibition really, but been fantastic, yeah.
It's been incredible. I think we knew it would be popular, but even we've been amazed by just how much people have loved Percy Kelly and how much people connect with him. I think that's what's so incredible about it for us, and we're just thrilled that so many people have had the opportunity to come and experience his work, to be honest.
Has it had a different feel to other exhibitions? Or?
I think so. I think because he's a local artist and people come in and a lot of people feel a personal connection to him or to the places he's painting, and they come in and they say, oh, I know that place, or I've been there, and it's got that real feel of community and that local feel, which has been really amazing to see.
And I mean, this is probably me getting a little bit sentimental here, but do you get sad when you take an exhibition down? It's all looking a bit sad, doesn't it?
Yes, because you get very attached to an exhibition and you put it up and you engage with it over a course of months, and then suddenly, it all has to come down and send everything back, which is a shame. And it's the first time that so many of his works have really been displayed in this way, and so for us, it's quite sad to take it down.
A month after the opening of the retrospective, in October 2017, I walked into Tullie House one morning and there was a friend, a lovely retired solicitor from Ipswich, who bought many paintings at Castlegate House, not just Kelly's, but quite a lot of good things. And he was sitting in the reception area. He looked very old and frail, but he'd made it on the train from Ipswich. And we walked round the exhibition together and had a coffee, and I took him out for lunch and saw him back to his train later on. I didn't know at the time, but that was our last meeting. The retrospective closed quite emotionally on the Sunday the 16th of February 2018. It had been extended for a month, so it had run 5 months in all. So I got home, happy but exhausted, poured myself a glass of wine, and there was an email in my box from a friend of David Heckle's telling me that he'd died, but that his solicitor would be getting in touch because he had left his 15 Kellys to Tullie House. I was in tears. What an ending to the show. This is the comprehensive 110-page catalogue in full colour that I put together for the exhibition. 2,000 were printed initially, and by Christmas of 2017 it had almost sold out, and the exhibition had been extended to 18th of February, so I quickly got another 2,000 printed, and they are still selling. The word of Percy still goes around. You can get one on the website. There's the address below, percykelly.co.uk, and it's in the merchandise section. If any of you order one of these, I will add an extra one of Kelly's back catalogues as an extra with every order. So thank you for listening. Bye.